We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Christina, thank you for joining me today, and thank you also for being willing to share your story. I have to say that it's interesting when we share our story because we never know how it's going to connect with others, but it always does connect with somebody, right? I know when we were talking, we connected as well on our stories. So, and some of the topics that we're going to kind of touch on today when you're telling your story is shame, which is huge, right? People pleasing and perfectionism. So I'll be able to pipe in on those as well. So let's start with you introducing yourself and telling us about you.
Sure. I'm Christina Smith. I am a life coach for midlife women. I work with women because I know how it is growing up as a woman, I guess. And a lot of those things came into play for me, the shame, the perfection, the people pleasing. I think it's something that's kind of cultured into us as we're raised, is to really good girl, good boy, right? What does that mean other than you're showing up the way that I expect you to? And so we learn from an early age that I want to be a good girl. I want to be a good boy. Even my husband has this wound about wanting to be a good boy. So when people are upset with us, we tend to think we've done something wrong. And that's really how I grew up. I was one of the oldest, so I took care of my younger brother and sister, and it was just expected of me. A lot of us in the 80s were parentified, right?
Oh,
By
that's a good word.
having to care for our younger ones. And it really did a lot to change the way that I saw the world. And I see this because I can compare it to other people who had these like really loving homes where their parents took care of them. They weren't that responsible for, maintaining the whole household while their parents were away. And it really creates this bond with you're only going to love me if I act the way that you want to. And it was crazy. I was just camping a few weeks ago, and in the campsite next to us, the father said to his, like, I'm guessing she was about 4, I really love you when you do what I ask you to. And I was like, ooh. To me, as a 4-year-old, I would start to think like that means that I am not loved when I am a bad girl, whatever that means, when I'm not living up to other people's expectations. So that's something that really followed me around. And I wasn't really socialized well because I moved so much that I didn't really learn how to make friends. And then in my 20s and 30s, I was like, how do I expand my circle of people? How do I manage these relationships, right? How do I know when I'm people pleasing or falling into one of these defaults rather than really moving forward with what I wanted? I realized in my mid 30s, I had checked all the boxes that my mom told me would make me happy when, right? Like if you get your college degree and you get that job and you get the husband and the house and the blah blah blah, then you'll be happy. And in my mid 30s, I realized I am not happy. I was actually at one of the most miserable points of my life. And so for me, I realized I was living someone else's life. Like I did the things that I was expected to do rather than really stepping into what is it that I wanted to do? What are my gifts? What are my strengths? What's really important to me? What do I crave? And that's when I started shifting and really looking at the perfectionism in me that was creating extreme exhaustion in my life from checking all those boxes. Next goal, check the box. Next goal, check the box. But I wasn't happy when I got there. And so there's a few things that I teach women, but one of them is really about how we set our intentions, which means how we really decide the truth of who we are and then live that way. And it sounds really complex, but when you have the tools, it's a lot easier. So
Yeah.
I also realized back when I first became a coach, I was a health coach, and I got to this point where I was like, everybody knows what they're supposed to do, right? Like the clients that I was having, they knew they're supposed to drink the damn water. They know they're supposed to exercise. They know they're supposed to eat healthy vegetables and, have a more plant-based diet than, a balanced diet, whatever that means to you. But they knew all of that stuff. But there was this like block of how do we shift over? And this happens even with people pleasing or perfect. Like, how do I let go of the perfectionism? Because there's a part of my brain that really believes that I have to do it perfect or else, I don't know,
There's
the,
consequences.
the sky is going to fall. Something's going to
Hmm.
happen if I don't do it perfect, or somebody is going to call me out on it, or whatever that thing is. And so I came up with a book. I wrote a book called Inviting Shift, which is about the 5 stages of shift and how we actually make those things happen, which I have loved. It has a lot of really great, if you haven't been doing personal growth work for a very long time, it has really great points in it about perfectionism, about shame, about people pleasing, and how we get past that, how we actually make ourselves transform those habits, rather than just, hitting our head on the wall. Um, and this is also the things that I teach in our modern midlife mentorship, which is a mentorship that I have for midlife women who are going through all kinds of things. They're letting go of their children. They're now just getting to the point where they're like, hold on, I checked all the boxes. I didn't even plan for the second half of my life. Like, what was I thinking I was going to do after this? And so instead of going back to our defaults of perfectionism and people pleasing and getting stuck in that shame, which can keep us, especially in midlife, in this really tight comfort zone, right? And we don't want to grow anymore. And I think that's what gets us stuck. That's when we start calling it a midlife crisis rather than a midlife calling, because we're not really listening to that inner voice
Hmm.
inside us. So all that to say that I really work with midlife women to uncover what it is that they want and what they truly want from their heart soul space,
Hmm.
and how they can bring that to fruition, through letting go of some of these old default behaviors.
So for you, and dealing with these 3 topics in your
Mm,
life, because I have dealt with all 3 of these. I'm still they've gotten a lot better, but they
mm,
still pop up for me.
sure.
You
And they
know,
always will, probably.
yeah,
I'm
and for me, because I've worked really hard on breaking
sure.
these in my life, that when they do pop up, it's really obvious to me.
Mhm.
It's really obvious. So for you, how did you, there's the awareness, right? And then how did you begin to work through these in your life so that
Yeah.
you
I love
created
that
this
you say,
great system?
yeah, I love that you say it's really obvious. And for us who have done a lot of work and we now can feel our feelings,
Right.
comes a lot easier. But at first, when we don't recognize them, it like we don't even notice that they're happening. We just do the people pleasing. We just go out of our way to make sure everything's perfect. But
Let me say something real quick, and I wanted to say this earlier. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
that's not,
But
no.
one of the things, and maybe others can relate to this too, when I was in that place, like there was a blurred line when it
Hmm.
came to people pleasing. Am I, like you were saying earlier, am I in that people pleasing place, or am I really trying to do something that's right? And there's a blurred line there. For me, it didn't feel like there was any boundary where I could go, oh, if I cross that line, that's now people pleasing, or that's, what was the other, perfectionism. Yeah.
Hmm.
uh, that used to be a really, I'm telling you, my perfectionism was so bad that I wouldn't have started this podcast had I not worked through that
Sure.
one. this would have never
Sure.
happened. But
Yeah.
there was no clear line for me. And I didn't know how to find that line. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, that's how we start out because the people pleasing is so ingrained in us that it seems like the right thing to do,
It
right?
just comes natural.
I should help that person if I can, right? I should do what they want. It's not that big of a deal to me. I'll just give up what I want and do what they want to do, right? Like it's hard to tell because we are so ingrained that other people are more important to ourselves. So the way that we start doing that is really one, feeling into our body and going, how does it feel when I say yes? How does it
Hmm.
feel when I say no? And then what are the consequences of saying no? For people pleasing was one of them, or even perfectionism. Like, what are the consequences if I do 80% instead of 100, right? Like, or 110, even perfectionists are usually after.
Yeah.
Um, and what does it feel like in my body? Because normally, with any transition, sometimes we don't notice until the moment's passed. We've
True.
already said yes, and now we're feeling resentful.
Yes.
We're exhausted because we spent so much time on details on something that really didn't really matter, right? So at
Mhm.
first, we notice in hindsight, unfortunately.
It's true. That's where you start.
Yeah, you notice in hindsight and go, wow, I really don't want to say yes to the PTA again. Like I don't want to say yes to help this person out again because maybe they need to find someone else. And this isn't about being cruel. I think that that's where we have that imbalance when it comes, especially to people pleasing. And then both of these can bring shame, right? Because what
Yeah.
happens when I do make a boundary with someone and then they're really mad about it? Oof, do I take that on about me or do I say, wow, they didn't take that well? Right.
Mhm.
I saw this great meme that said the other day, I have a friend that's so confident. And I asked her, how can you be so confident? And she's like, well, it's simple. When people hurt you, you think it's about you. When people hurt me, I think there's something wrong with them. So, no, so we start seeing these things like in hindsight, and then hopefully we get closer and closer to the moment where we can make a different decision, right? And that's when we start noticing it because when we start tuning into our feelings, we can tell in the moment that I'm asked to do that PTA thing that suddenly like my stomach starts grumbling
Mhm.
and I'm like, no, that's going to put way too much pressure on me. I am important too. And I think that that's the part that we need to get to is actually I'm important too. And that's whether it's perfectionism or people pleasing, I'm important too. So I'm not going to exhaust myself being up all night worried about the details of this thing when they don't really matter. I'm not going to say yes when I mean no. Um, so there's those different shifts. So the first part of shift is the S, which is something ain't right. Right. And that's when we usually start noticing it later. Like I'm exhausted all the time. Why do
Mhm.
I keep giving so much of myself? Why am I, and this is like, around holiday time is like the perfect time for you to tune into this because this is when we tend to overgive. And there's nothing wrong with giving. I'm not trying to say that we should all be selfish and narcissistic and only take care of ourselves, but there should be a balance at least where we are at least equal to the people around us and our time and our energy is equal to the people around us.
Yeah.
Second part of shift would be that H, which is like honing in and honoring. Like, let me hone in what's really going on in here. Well, I'm not giving myself enough rest or time to take care of myself. I am saying yes to people just because I want them to like me. I don't want to upset anyone. And sometimes for us to do the right thing for ourselves, it does upset other people. If other people have been taking advantage or manipulating us for years into doing their, bidding, then they are gonna be upset when we
Mhm.
decide, hey, I'm important too, right? And that's okay. We can let them be upset. That's their problem. That's not our problem. But we start honing in on what's really important to us. And then the third stage is where we get this, I got it, right? And we think like the aha, ooh, I got the information. I know how I want to show up. And we often think that that's where it ends. Like, all right. got it. I'm not going to people please anymore, right? Just like you said, it still comes up sometimes, right?
Oh yeah.
At this stage, we're like, oh no, I'm clear. I understand. But then we get to the F stage, which is so appropriately named, which is a fear of fortitude or whatever F word you want to throw in there. But that's when we have to start changing our defaults. So when Susie says, hey, I really need you to babysit my kids on Friday, but I already have plans, I can I can actually say no. Like I can actually say, I'm sorry, that just doesn't fit for me. Or I can say no to that PTA meeting, or I can say that's good enough. 80% is good enough. Um, and so that's the hard stage. That's where we have to be like really mindful and start listening to our body, doing things that we weren't doing before. And this is the hardest stage for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So
The
we're
practice
sure.
stage.
Yeah, because it's a big shift. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to constantly find ourselves beyond that point and go, damn, I did it again.
Yeah.
Did it again. And we're going to have to keep practicing and practicing. And there can be a shift, but we have to stick with the F stage. If not, a lot of us try to give up the F stage and, well, there must be an easier way. I got to go back and just, and we start the whole suffering cycle over again because we want it to be easy. And unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
growth work and getting rid of these old beliefs that are so ingrained in us is work. Um, and so we haven't brought up shame. I haven't brought up shame yet, but I do want to touch on shame because it's it comes up in this growth cycle
Oh,
because
a lot.
I'm going to feel shame if I didn't give it 110%. I'm going to feel shame if that person's really put in a bad spot because I can't help them, or if they're upset because I'm not helping them. I'm going to be upset on the other end if I continue the same behavior. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's what we have to look at is how can we move forward being really true to ourselves. And I don't know if that happened for you, but for me, that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking of the whole perfectionism, what you're just describing. And it's like, we also, when we realize, oh, I slipped back again, perfectionism can also come in there and we can be really hard on ourselves when we do slip back. Right. And
Mhm.
it's a journey. And
Mhm.
so you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have slip ups. You're not going to have as many and you're going to catch it. And I know for me, I had to learn to be a lot easier on myself because I would never be hard on someone else, right? Someone else I love and I see them slip back. I'm not going to go and be hard on themselves. And I was really hard on myself. I was very harsh words in my head. And, I remember the day I heard them. I like
Mhm.
heard them. They weren't just barking at me and just motivating my movements. I actually heard them. And I was like, oh no, and so we have to give ourselves grace and we have to just know that that's going to happen. And you just got to keep moving forward and not spend time on that mess up or whatever. Don't spend time with that.
And that again, shame is ingrained in a lot of us too. I was raised Catholic, and one of
Mm-hmm.
our version of Catholicism was if something bad is happening to you, it's because you deserved it. You did something wrong in order to deserve that. So, like when bad things would happen, even if I had no control, I can go straight to shame, like, oh, I must have done something. I must have deserved this. I must have caused this, right? It's the consequences of my action. And so shame can be so deeply ingrained in us. And the way that, a lot of us were raised where we were shamed for the bad things that we did, instead of like talking through and being like, wow, that's just a bad thing you did. That's not who you are, right? Because that would be guilt instead of shame. I had more than guilt. It was like, there is something wrong with me that this stuff is happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get to that part, uh, we just learn how to shame ourselves. And we think that that's going to somehow change our behavior. Like that's going to somehow make it all better. But I would love what Brene Brown says. And she says that shame hits the very part of ourselves that thinks that we're capable of change.
Mm,
So we're never going to
mm,
be able to change by shame. We can't shame ourselves into being a magnificent person, right? We actually break down the part of us that thinks that it's possible that we could be anything else. So really sitting with the shame and understanding that a lot of it isn't even our shame. You know, a lot of us were sexually abused and we still carry the shame with us. And
hmm
that's not our shame. That, you know, we did nothing wrong. We were children. And so letting go of that shame part of ourselves is exactly what you said, like learning how to be kind instead of shaming ourselves. How can we be kind to ourselves? How can we have compassion for the fact that we're humans living this really messy human experience and that things happen and it doesn't necessarily mean it was my fault or I had any control over it. Now, guilt, I think a certain amount of guilt is good. It's still not going to make us change, right? But
Right.
can work through guilt. We can say, ah, I did that one dumb thing and that was hurtful to Susie or whatever. And so I can apologize, I can make up for it, and guilt will go away. But shame is something that's really ingrained in ourselves. And it's just like I was saying about that man who said, you know, I love you when you act the way I want you to, basically. It's just like, wow, so if I don't act the way you want me to, then then that's shameful because I'm sure it goes the opposite way. Like, oh my goodness, you're not doing what I want. I don't like this. And so we start thinking it's not the act that they don't like, but it's who I am, right? Like
Right.
there's a lot of shame around. I was a really smart girl, but my mom would always tell me I didn't have enough common sense about things, right? So I have shame around my intelligence. And what that turns into is these wounds that we have, right? So my inner child, whenever she's accused not being smart enough, she wants to like stand up and throw a temper tantrum and tell you
hmm
how smart I am, or any of those wounds that we have, right? Abandonment, we can even see as our own fault. Well, I wasn't showing up the way they expected, so they left me. And that's not really us either, right? So just looking at these are all related because they're all so ingrained. And if we
hmm
there's something in our little child that was told, if you don't show up in a way that you're constantly pleasing other people, or doing things to the extreme or perfection, then we're doing something wrong and something bad could happen.
hmm Yep. Oh yeah. I was sitting here reflecting and I was thinking, gosh, I can see where it's kind of a perfectionism. So I had parents who really didn't teach me anything. And then there was the expectation that I should just know.
Mhm.
And then when I would make a mistake because nobody taught me, then I would be criticized for making that choice and not, like you said, sat down and, okay, you made that decision. Let's talk this out. And I can just see that that was so prevalent in my life. So I carried such deep shame, and attached to that was I should have known,
Mhm.
and I should be able to read people's minds. And I should have known that. I should have expected that. And that was exhausting.
Mm.
And that was so liberating for me. And I don't remember exactly what switched in me when I realized, okay, this is not my fault. Like over time, over like especially the last couple of years, that's been worked through a lot in my therapy of really understanding deep in my heart that the abuse really wasn't my fault. Like I knew that for years. I could say it, and I knew it to be true, but it's just been recently where I really understand that, and it's
Mm.
liberating. And so all that released me from so much of the perfectionism and obviously the shame, right?
Mhm.
And so I don't know. I'm doing so much reflecting because in doing these podcasts, of course, I'm doing a lot of research. So stuff is coming up in me and I'm going, oh, okay, that's why I did that. And this is some
Mm.
of the stuff that's coming up. And even when we're having this conversation, it's like I see where that part of my shame and perfectionism came from. And could you
Mhm.
imagine trying to chase that perfectionism? Nobody's teaching you how to do it. And when you do make a mistake, you're criticized.
Mhm.
Imagine
Yeah.
that perfectionism.
And what I love that you said about that is like, I knew that it was wrong, right? And we all did. We all knew that those things were wrong. Like, I was sexually abused and I knew that that was wrong.
Yeah,
However, uh, thinking something and feeling it are completely different things. So they get
exactly.
trapped in our body. And that's the thing that comes out in the F stage that we don't really want to look at, is that the I got it is like, I understand logically. Like I am a what I call a mental bypasser. I spent years and years and years reading books and trying to understand how the human mind works. And so I could say, well, that makes complete sense that this is how things, right? But I wouldn't actually do the work. And so I wouldn't actually, do the journaling questions at the end of the chapter or the worksheets or whatever.
Just
And
took
then
in
I'm
all the information.
yeah.
Just took it
And then I
in.
why it's all still stuck in my body because, part of the personal growth work is the work part, which is the part that we're scared of. That's dealing with the feelings about it and really, going deep and like almost like pulling that stuff out of us, and it's a lot more than just I logically understand that this is effed up. It's really like, okay, well, now that I understand that, how do I bring that into my body? Because I know that people think that we can analyze and figure things out in our brain. But that's not where most of our personal growth work is. That's a really great band-aid. I mean, it's really great to have that knowledge, but it's like going to medical school, but never practicing medicine. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, I can't really say I'm a doctor if I've never done the actual medical stuff. I
Right,
can know all the doctor stuff, but actually practicing is going to be much different
right.
than just learned in a book. And that's how it is with personal growth work. And unfortunately, for a lot of people that don't like to do their feelings work, right? That's where it is. It's in our feelings. And for those people listening that are like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. I want you to know that when it comes to feelings, the reason why some people call them negative feelings like anger and sadness and grief and fear and shame, I call them uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah,
They're uncomfortable because nobody showed us a good way of expressing them or a good way of working through them. Maybe we saw somebody get really angry and aggressive when they were angry, right? And so now there's a ton of women out there that are like, no, no, I can't get angry. I can't get angry. I don't want to get angry. But we're fearful that we're gonna display it in the same way.
right.
It's not our anger doesn't have to come out aggressive at other people. In fact, if we're dealing with our anger very well, we can release it in safe places and safe ways. And then we don't have to get to that blow up. But nobody taught us how
Exactly.
feelings. They just said, you'll be happy when, you'll be happy when. They
Right.
didn't they didn't say, oh wow, grief. It's okay to feel really sad about things. I got the when I was young, that's nothing to be sad about. That's nothing to be angry about. Because to my parents, it wasn't. But instead of helping me deal with like how do I really manage, and not to blame them, the whole generation was like that. But um, but instead of teaching me how to deal with like, ooh, yeah, it looks like you're feeling really angry. What do we want to do with that anger? Like how can we express that in a good way and then get to what's underneath the anger? Because there's usually something underneath the anger. So how do we deal with the grief that's underneath there, the shame or the fear? And that's the only reason we call them negative emotions is because we want to avoid them. But they're like 90% of our humanity is like these uncomfortable feelings. For some of us, joy is a really uncomfortable feeling. For me, it is because when I came home with joy, somebody wanted to snatch it from me
Yep.
in my house. And so I learned how to keep my joy really small and close to me. And so, that can tend to be a really uncomfortable feeling for me. It's the same thing. I just haven't, I didn't grow up in a house where joy was like a constant thing. It was like I was more used to anger and sadness, and
Mhm.
those I'm actually more comfortable with. Joy, I get to a level of here and I'm like, okay, had enough, gotta go.
Gets overwhelming. It gets overwhelming and you need a break. Yeah,
Mhm.
I get that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
get that. So anger is an emotion that we all deal with, right? And there's usually emotions underneath that. what would you say to the listeners would be a good easy way to maybe start releasing that anger or discovering
Mhm.
that anger or working through it? What would you recommend?
Yeah. For me, what helped was I got a tennis racket and I used to hit my couches because for me, I understand that under my anger comes from this wounded inner child that has no other way of expressing her emotions because she doesn't really understand them. And that's our archetype as a child. Like, we're not meant to really understand them. We're supposed to be taught how to understand them. But if we weren't, we just, anger tends to come out over everything because
Mhm.
it's basically our suffering and what the Buddhists would say, the world's just not showing up the way I want it to, right? And so now I'm just angry about it. But usually after I take that tennis racket, whack my couches are nice and clean. Um, then there's usually something underneath, and it's usually a sadness. I'm sad that that person abandoned me. I'm sad that that person is treating me like this. I'm fearful of how this person is talking to me. There's other emotions that are underneath it. Anger is just like, it's like when we say the word stress, that could mean a million things. And stress is usually the word that we use when we're feeling too much, overwhelmed, frustrated, who knows. It could be a million things. And that's what I feel like anger is. Like, there's something underneath it in our humanity that we are avoiding, because that's not nothing to be sad about, right? So a lot of my sadness turns to anger because I was told that I didn't really have anything valid in my life to be sad
Mm,
about. Right. And so I would get angry because I was like, why am I getting sad? And then I would get angry at my anger. You know what I mean? And then it just like, it's a snowball from there. I'm
mhm.
angry that I'm angry. I'm angry that I'm showing up this way when I'm angry. I'm angry that I'm throwing a temper tantrum. I'm angry that I just can't be grateful and I just can't be okay in this moment. But it's really just a panic attack around, I don't know how to deal with this feeling that I'm having. And
Yeah.
so it's easier to go to anger than it is for us to really do the work and go, wow, what's going on for me right now? I'm feeling a lot of anger. And I'm like, whew, I feel like I'm being treated unfairly. So I'm sad that this person isn't, seeing me as an equal or whatever the thing is.
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good point. It's like I've learned because I was so quick to react
Mm.
and because I was in survival mode for many, many years, so I was always on the edge, right? And I could hit it, I could hit the ceiling real quick. If it wasn't too far away. And I had to teach myself to bite my tongue. And I had to teach myself to say, I need a minute or I need to go process because my default was always anger.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned, like you said, that, okay, there's something else going on. And I need to kind of go take a minute and process it and sort it out and figure out what it is that's going on before I respond to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because my reaction in that moment, of course, because it was always anger, would be very ugly and
Mm-hmm.
hurtful. And I say in so many podcasts, I got really tired of cleaning up my messes.
Yeah. I hear that one so clearly. I'm sure that there's people who knew me 15, 20 years ago that are like, how is she a life coach? But it's
I
because of
know,
all
I
that,
know,
right?
I
It's
know.
because of all of that that I really had to do a lot of work and study it and go, wow, what is this thing that's going on for me? And I'm wondering, as you're telling me that, how was anger expressed when you were a child?
It was physical.
It was, yeah, it
It
was
was
scary.
physical and verbal. It was frightening. It was
Yeah.
frightening. And I could remember when it wasn't directed at me. I can remember one time, this is so vivid. My brother was screaming at my mom. They were having a fight and they were literally in each other's faces. And I remember thinking, oh my God, he's going to hurt her. And I ran into my room and I ran to the furthest corner I could find and hunched down because I didn't want to hear her get hurt. I
Mm.
knew something bad was going to happen. I mean, that was regular in my house. That is how anger was expressed. So it
Right,
was
right.
frightening.
So it's understandable that when you when you had anger, that it would come up in a not so pretty way.
Ugly.
Because that's all we knew is like when you're angry, you get to act like that. And it doesn't mean
Exactly.
like, I don't think that I went to the extremes that my parents did when it came to anger, but it still was messy and it still wasn't pretty and it
Exactly.
still wasn't the way that I want to show up, even if I am angry. Right. And
Yeah.
so for a while, I did the same thing that you did. And I still have to do it if I'm really angry,
Hmm.
is like, I need to walk away and process what's going on for me. Because whatever conversation we're about to have is not going to be helpful if I'm in this triggered space. And I think that that's the most important thing, is like, when we talk about solving things like people pleasing and shame and perfectionism, it's boundaries. And I know that people often think that boundaries are what you do when you don't like what somebody else is doing. But boundaries are also about us. Like, I need to make boundaries for myself. Hey, Christina, we're not going to scream like a maniac because we don't want to
Exactly.
embarrass ourselves. So when I'm feeling anger, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk away and take care of myself, so that I don't have this messy situation that I have to come back and clean up later, or say things that, can't be taken back, really. They're always going to be out there, even if I apologize for them. So I had to make boundaries for myself around how I was going to show up. Okay, until I'm not triggered, I'm not going to have that conversation, but I am going to, commit to going to do the work and trying to figure out what's going on underneath that. Why? Because whenever my anger comes up, it's either like my warrior energy, which is like protective,
Hmm.
or it's that inner child that is just like, I'm
Wounded.
overwhelmed. I don't know how to manage this right now.
Yeah.
And so much. And neither of those are really good when
Out of
I'm in a
balance, they're not great. Yeah. And they're out
I
of
tell my
balance.
clients, I used to have like, my child was driving the bus and the warrior had like their foot on the gas, and that's what happens when I'm angry, is that like, it's like, yeah, I'm ready to fight. Like, I don't do the flight so well, but I can get really good at fighting. And so I've learned to do a little bit more flight, not in the forget about it all kind of
Just take a step
situation,
back.
but just like, let me get a breath. Let me realize that this is just emotion that's coming up. This doesn't have to be acted on in this moment. I know my inner adolescent wants to be like, yeah, let's go. I got the
Hmm.
swords, but that doesn't help me very much. So it doesn't serve me in the bigger aspect of things. And so having to step back and go, okay, so what's going on for me? I mean, it's magic in my marriage too, because when two people are doing their work, they can come together and go, wow, I noticed that my wounded child was up. Oh, yeah. And then your wounded child said this, and whew, mine came right up
Hmm.
too. And then it became this battle of, he touched me first, or
Stop
whatever.
touching me.
First, no, you did it. No, she did it. Like, right. And then it just becomes a battle of wounded children, which is not really useful in a relationship. So if we can both go away and do our work and then come back and be really honest, hey, this is what was going on for me. This wound was touched about my intelligence, and all of a sudden, like a cat in a corner, my wounded child came out swinging, and that's what happened. And so if we can start recognizing, even if archetypes isn't your thing, for me, archetypes are really beautiful because they represent the different feelings that I'm having in my body. I know when I'm feeling like I'm in my queen. I know when I'm feeling like I'm in my wounded child, right? We want to go curl under the covers, or, tell everybody how it's not our fault. We don't want to be responsible for this anymore. And so for me, archetypes really help to connect to those energies, but you can do it by just feeling. We know when we're feeling different ways. Like, if I'm feeling scared, I feel a quiver in my chest. This is going to be different for everybody. If I'm feeling angry, oof, my gut starts tensing up, and I know that that's anger, right? So we all have different physical sensations that happen when we're feeling certain ways. And that's where we start to get to choose a different path. And that's, you know, the challenging part sometimes. But if I want different results, I'm going to have to make different choices, unfortunately.
Hmm. Yeah. And this is another area that you need to give yourself a lot of grace in too, because when I first started, recognizing and saying I need a minute, it would take a while for me to kind of process it and figure it out. And with practice, because stepping away, because for me, it would be all these emotions and craziness and thoughts that would be going through my head. It would feel like it was just overwhelming. And my old way was to react. And so I knew I needed to step back and kind of sort through it. And with practice, I can get clarity a lot quicker,
Mm-hmm.
a lot quicker. And it's so nice because it's so frustrating when you don't know why you're upset.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what was happening. I knew I was triggered. I'm like, I know I'm really upset. I just don't know what. And it's my head's spinning. I need a minute, and now I'm like, oh, okay. I feel it. I'm going to step away for a minute. I'm going to go sort this out and then come back and have a conversation. And boy, is that refreshing that I don't have to clean that stuff up. I still
Yeah.
mess up. I do. And I'll come out and I'll say it. But
Mm-hmm.
before
We all do.
I would just be so vicious and I didn't care in the minute, when I was being so vicious. And then later on, you talk about shame.
Mm.
That would go deep.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there I am showing up like a witch again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like showing up as that evil person, that whole judgment I have around myself, around that energy. And there I am proving it again. There's evidence, more evidence as to why I'm a witch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like why
Mm-hmm.
I'm evil, why I'm meanie. Yeah, I get it. And that's the cycle that we go into when we're not actually doing the work. When we do that mental bypassing that I do, some people have a spiritual bypass where they're like, I'll just let God take care of it. Well, God wants you to do your work too.
Yeah, you have your own stuff you need to do with him. It's a partnership.
It's your journey. Yeah, it's your journey too. So there's work that you have to do. So whenever we do something to avoid those feelings, I mean, and that could be alcohol, that could be whatever it is that we use to avoid feelings, then we're not doing the work. But when we start applying it, right, that's when we start going, oh, I see that. I recognize that. So even though I have, I still have the same wounds I had 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
they just don't show up the same way because I'm like, ooh, there it goes. I'm that little ping of my intelligence is being insulted. Don't react, Christina. We know that this is just this person making assumptions, or I'm assuming that their intentions, right? I have no idea what their actual intentions are unless I ask them. So let's just give them a moment to talk this out, and instead of reacting to that. And it's just tiny little steps because a lot of my clients, they've been with me for a couple of years, and they're like, I just don't feel like I'm getting anywhere with this. I'm like, just wait, you're gonna see it. And now it's like, I had a client the other day who her boss said something to her that 2 years ago would have had her telling herself stories for weeks and really beating herself up. And, you know, to me, it was like overblown how she would have taken the
Yeah.
criticism. And today she's just like, oh, why don't you just have a conversation with her and see what it is that she expects from me? Or, what her intentions are, what is best for me to do at this point, rather than going down that rabbit hole of shame. And like, that's a big thing. Like, that's a huge thing for for her not to take this so personally. It was a huge accomplishment, but it's not like she went from 0 to 100. She made lots of different steps. She started saying, well, how is it that I want to show up? Do I feel good about the way I was showing up? Like there was a lot of little pieces in between there that got her there. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like a magic wand where I'm like, tomorrow I'm going to be a new person. I'm not going to react to things. That would be really great.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Where is that pill?
But how empowering for her, because the way she was 2 years ago, she was really a victim, right? She had kind of
Mhm,
had the victim mindset, and now she's empowered. And it's
mhm,
not a personal thing. Because for me, what was really freeing too is realizing, oh, I don't have to read everybody's mind. I don't have to know all that. I don't have, like, it was so like, oh, I can say, I don't know,
mhm.
and really be okay with it. And if somebody wants to criticize me for it, well, I'm just telling you, I don't know,
Well, and we
and
spent
not
so much
defend
time.
myself.
Yeah, like you said, we spend so much time trying to figure out what everybody else needs because that's how we were raised, right?
Yep.
Like to predict what people would need and be there and support them and give it to them. And we never took that time to be like, "Well, what is it that I want? And when I realized that all I was in charge of was me, well, and my child at the time, but all I was really in charge of and I could control was me,
Yep.
it was like such a breath of fresh air. I was like, you mean I don't need to anticipate what everybody else needs? That they could just ask me if they need something, or I could just ask them if they need something rather than jumping through hoops and trying to make someone happy. Like I can actually focus on what would make me happy. Because what happens when we do that is like, it's like an unwritten contract. I'm going to try to make you happy and you're going to try to make me happy.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we're different people, we don't know what each other needs or wants. And but we're just going to keep playing this game. And then I'm going to get mad because you're going to do something that to me doesn't feel very loving, but to you probably was like, this is the ultimate, right? So it's like all this guessing back and forth rather than saying, you know what? I'm going to take care of me. And if I need anything or want anything, I'm going to ask you for that. And you can take care of you. And if you need anything or want anything, you can ask me for that. And that is like, whew. Of
It's,
course, then
yeah.
you have to figure out what you want and what you need. So
I
that's
call
all.
those unsaid expectations.
Yeah, yeah. They're like unwritten contracts. Like
Yeah.
you're gonna make me happy. How is that possible?
It's
And
impossible.
we really learned that when I went through a huge depression, I don't know, about 8 years ago. And my husband would get so frustrated because he couldn't make me happy. And I wanted him to. Like I was still in sometimes victim mode. And I was like, I want you to make me happy. But there was nothing he could do. That was all
Mm-mm.
my own work that I had to do myself. And so he was getting frustrated because I was upset and he couldn't do anything about it. And I was getting frustrated that he couldn't just be my knight in shining armor and fix it for me, you know? And so we both had to do our own work about, he had to do his work about being uncomfortable, that I was uncomfortable, and I had to do my work around being uncomfortable. And that was so much easier than him trying to figure out that magic button that was going to make me happy. Or, you know, me waiting for someone else to fix my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, these unwritten contracts are really tricky because nobody ever mentions them, but it's like I see it all the time online when people are like, well, people aren't going to treat you the way that you treat them. Yeah, because that may not be love to them. You know, they might
Right.
treat you a different way because that's what it looks like for them, you know, and we have different understandings and backgrounds. And so it's so much easier for us to figure out what we need and what we want and be able to express that than like constantly trying to figure out what do they need? What do they need? How can I make them happy? And like always outside of ourselves rather than inside of ourselves. And I think that that's what the people pleasing and the perfectionism and the shame taught us when we were young is like, it doesn't matter how you think you should show up. It only matters how other people think you should show up. And that was really damaging because we started to think, well, then I'm not important. And it's, you know, how can we have a really fantastic life if we are constantly thinking that we're not important? And then
Yeah.
telling those stories behind with shame, going, yep, you're not. Let me show you all the evidence. Remember in third grade when you did this? Oh, that was awful. How did you not know to do that? You know, and all the shame that comes with it. We have a
Mm-hmm.
whole shame tape that plays when we allow ourselves to get there. But when we start making these changes, we can start going, do I really need to take that on? No, I was 8 years old. I did something silly and I thought it would be funny and it wasn't. It was hurtful or whatever. And that's just how I learn. That's just the humaning part of ourselves. And so I
Mm-hmm.
always say that we need to be more gentle with our humanness because we're not robots. We wish we had all the answers and we could follow the steps perfectly, but unfortunately, that's not any part of the human experience.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned earlier about controlling this and not being able to control. And I want the listeners to know that that is so freeing. When I discovered it though, at first I was angry. I was really angry. And I think
Mhm.
it was because I had in my head that if I could control all this, then that would make it comfortable for me, right? If I could control all that. And it was an exhausting job
Mhm.
that I could not fulfill. And so at first I was very angry for a minute. I literally was screaming in my living room. I can tell you exactly where I was at, exactly where my head was at when I realized it. And I stood up in my family room and I screamed and had a little tantrum. And then I took a minute and went, well, actually, that's quite liberating. I started going down all the list of things that I didn't have be responsible for anymore.
Mm-hmm.
This right here is, I say it all the time on podcasts. This right here is enough for me. More than
Mm-hmm.
enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But nobody taught us how to do the internal work.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I mean, I think we'd be a greater society if everybody was looking within themselves and asking themselves, like, what is my anger about, rather than who is my anger about,
Right.
right? Or what
Especially
can I
now,
blame
right?
or shame? And I mean, in the process of blaming and shaming, we always come into that. So instead of me going to blaming and shaming, which is a very wounded child action because they have no other choice, they have no other way of doing it. It's like when a 8-year-old lies, did you hit that boy? No, it's because we don't know we understand that we've just done something wrong, but we want to get out of it, right? And so that's when we go to this blaming and shaming, rather than if we would sit with it and go, oh, okay, looks like I need some boundaries there. That's something I can control. I can't control whether or not Lisa is going to say mean things to me, but I can control how much time I spend around Lisa. And if she does start saying mean things to me, I can be like, okay, well, I'm done for today. I'm walking away now, right? Like, so those are boundaries that I can make for myself. Um, so that I can control my safety, so that I can control what feels good to me. But we don't like making them. I mean, we don't like making boundaries. We really wish that people would just show up the way we want them to, and then we
It'd be
wouldn't
so
have to do any
easy.
work.
My life's so much easier if everybody just cooperated with me.
Yep, yep. And all the circumstances, everything just worked out the way I wanted to, everything would be fine. And that's really how my mom thought for the longest time, right? Like she would blame us for lots of things. I can't go to school because you guys won't let me focus on it. And it's like, you can go focus on it. You're not home half the time anyway. Or you guys, it was always like she couldn't do what she wanted because of us. And it was like, and we are consequences of your behavior, by the way. It's not like we just popped up here.
Yeah, I
We
didn't choose
because
to
of you.
necessarily be here.
Exactly. And so and I remember witnessing that as feeling so unempowered, that I was like, wow. And it felt really scary because it felt like no one had any control over their lives, that things just happened and messed with them. And then they just gave up or whatever, and then blamed it on those things. And it just seems so unempowering to
Mm-hmm.
be like my life is responsible, is a direct consequence of everybody else's reactions and actions, rather than this is really about how I'm feeling disempowered. And it's okay to sometimes we feel disempowered, but it's not okay to take that out on other people and blame and shame other people for it.
Mm-mm. No, that turns
It
into
doesn't get us
bullying.
anywhere.
No, no.
What are we're just stuck then. If my power is contingent on other people showing up the
Oof.
way I want them to, I have no power in that situation.
You
So
will
I am a
never.
victim. Yeah, I'll always be a victim.
Yeah.
I I'm giving up control and power.
And that is what I did for so many years when I was in my
Hmm.
victim mindset. I didn't take responsibility for my actions. Well, that wouldn't have happened if you didn't da 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 da. Or, if that didn't happen, then I wouldn't have, I could find a reason why everything was happening and it wasn't my fault.
Hmm.
And it's exhausting. All that stuff is exhausting.
It is exhausting. And what did we need instead? I needed boundaries. I needed boundaries from my parents. I just didn't know that, right? Like I needed to know, like, and it happened later in life, like then as a coach, when I have conversations with my mother and she feels like she's disempowering herself, I'll ask her questions. She doesn't want to do the work. She'd prefer it just to be someone else's, fault or problem or
Mhm.
whatever. And to me, it's like, but it could be so much more. Like you have so much more power in this situation. And it's like, it's that people pleaser in us. We don't want to set boundaries because we don't want to upset anybody. What if they don't like our boundaries, right? Like, what if they don't like the way that we hold ourselves important? And say, no, I'm not going to deal with that anymore. So we don't want to have to do that. And that's the control that we have sometimes in life. To be really fully empowered, it means making a choice between several things we don't like. And there's no, we expect that there's just like one perfect answer that's going to come up. And sometimes it's not that. Sometimes, like,
Mm-mm.
well, I could continue to be treated like this way that I really hate this person treating me like, or I can set myself a boundary and possibly upset them, but then that's their fault or their problem, not my problem. And so, we don't want any of those. We want the perfect solution that makes everybody loving and everybody like solve the problem. And that's just unfortunately not what empowerment is about. Empowerment is actual work. Like it's actual figuring out what we need, being vulnerable enough to ask for it, having those hard conversations that we don't necessarily want to have,
Mm.
communicating way more than I would choose to as an introvert.
Yeah. 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 And I'm sitting here thinking on my mindset when I was little and thinking about the reason why I understood why I became a people pleaser is because if everybody's happy, then I'm not going to get hurt.
Ooh, it's safe.
Right? I'm not going to get hurt. If everybody's happy, I'm not going to get hurt. So I've got to juggle all those balls, making sure mom's happy, dad's happy, brother's happy. I'm safe. It's going to be a good night.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like for the most part, our holidays were pretty good because they were special,
Mm.
when I was younger. But other than that, yeah, I was sitting here thinking, like, I'm telling you, this stuff is like coming together in my head when I do these podcasts and when I do my research.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of them. That is why definitely I people please, because that made it safe. Because it happens sometimes that they were all three were happy at once and it was a good time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, low consequences, no, low negative consequences, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I completely get that. We had a house where anger was like the core emotional vibe in the family is just like anger. And it was like, walking on eggshells, trying to
Yeah.
get around the house so that like, oof, don't piss off anybody. And you don't know how you're gonna make them angry because, I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. I was doing my chores. I was a good little girl. I did the most amount of chores. I made sure everything was taken care of. I made dinner at night, like all these things, trying to just, keep peace in the house. Like it wasn't even looking for joy. I was just looking for peace so that nothing scary would happen
Mm-hmm.
and no yelling, no, physical violence. And so, yeah, and that's where our people pleaser can definitely come from, especially if we've had a trauma-filled childhood. Because it's like, if I can balance all these balls as if some 8 or 10 or 12-year-old is supposed to
Right.
balance all of these balls, they should be taught how the balls are balanced, not necessarily their responsibility. But as children, we just know that if they're happy and they're happy and they're happy, then nothing bad happens. And that's all we could draw from it. And so if I just make sure that nothing bad happens, right? As
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if
Oh
that's
yeah.
within our purview.
No, I can even remember walking in the front door and really looking around and feeling the vibe and seeing, what's going on, what kind of mood is
Mhm.
everybody in. And if it didn't feel good, I would go straight to my room.
Mm.
That was my safe place in the house. But it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and when we have that kind of trauma when we're young, like I can tell you by somebody's footsteps what mood they're in.
Oh
Ooh,
yeah.
that angry or what it's coming at my room. Like, oh no, is this okay today or not? Right. And so we start getting hyper vigilant about hearing and seeing all of the things, which I mean, I want to say that became a gift later in life because
Mm-hmm.
I can read people very well. I can communicate with them very well because I can read the energy that they're kind of in. And
Exactly.
so, although that was a gift, I mean, I probably would have traded that for not having to be so hyper vigilant as a
Right.
child.
I agree. I agree. I
It is
agree.
something that is special about us now, though, is that we can see those things, and that kind of is a gift because there's a lot of people who my husband grew up in a very loving, safe household, and so he it blows his mind that like I can hear every little thing, that I can see things, I can smell things before he does. Like all of my senses are heightened because of the way that I grew up. And it was,
Hmm.
I mean, because it was danger and it was like, how do I keep myself safe? Because nobody else was there to do it for me. And so, as a child, all we can do is use what we have, which is our senses.
Exactly. I call myself the risk manager of the house. Because my husband says the same thing too. I'm like, we can't da 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 because, and he's like, really? I didn't even notice that. And he's learned to listen to me for the most part. When I give him a heads up on something, I'm like, I don't know. And he'll most of the time, he'll listen and, take heed. And it's not that I'm right. It just, we do have that sensitivity.
Hmm.
And so I do call myself the risk manager of the house. That's what I look for.
Yeah,
That's
and it
interesting
doesn't
that I
mean,
would go into a legal background and then a real estate it makes sense that I went in that arena
yeah,
for a while.
right, right, because you could assess the risk of things. And I think that that's important. And as I've gotten older, I'm leaning into more of how he sees the world because I'm like, right, because that's how it would be if I didn't have that trauma, right? Like
Exactly.
that's how it would have been if like we're completely different people. He wakes up and just sees the good in the world and is like, oh, it's gonna be a great day, jumps
Sounds
out
like
of
my husband.
does dishes and everything. And I'm more of a like a late night person now that because in the morning I gotta take care of all the things, make sure that there's no risk and do all the planning in my head, like whoop, 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 what's happening today, right? So it takes me a little longer, but then I'm up all night. That's when I get to finally relax because the day's over or whatever. So
Quiet.
for us, it's like completely different energies. And so I try to lean into his more, I don't want to say idyllic. What would be the word here? Just more open and yeah, open to the world and open
Yeah.
to happening rather than me is like my answer is no until I think about it and then it might be yes. You know what I mean? The risk manager, like, what? Hold on. Before we
Yeah.
move forward, let's think about this and all the things that could possibly go wrong and decide whether or not it's worthy of taking the risk. And he's just like, no, let's just go do it. Like, I mean, he's a lot more spontaneous than I am. He just anticipates that people are going to be really beautiful in the world and good things are going to happen. And that is not where I was raised.
I am married to the same man, and I do watch him, and I have learned a lot from him. And I call it iron sharpens iron
Mm-hmm.
because, my strengths help his weaknesses and vice
Mm-hmm.
versa. And so, but I have learned a lot from him because he too grew up in a very loving, you
Mm-hmm.
know, family, wonderful parents. I mean, a true love story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do listen to him because he does see it different. And so I'll assess it, compare, especially if I'm being harsh. If I feel like I'm being harsh or critical or judgmental, I will listen to him because I want to see what he has to say and get a different perspective and make sure it's not a trigger in me or, my perception is off. And so it's wonderful having that in our life. It can be frustrating sometimes, but
I was gonna say it's a love-hate thing because the same reasons I married him for are the same reasons that drive me freaking crazy sometimes. He won't plan ahead. He was going on a trip by himself and he wanted to take a monitor. He had to work from wherever he was going. So he wanted to take a monitor, but the monitors, yeah, were way too big to go in the carry-on. But he just kept telling me, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And in the morning of the flight, there it is. And I'm like, what are you going to do? Put that under the seat? Like that monitor is not going to fit under like, what are you doing? And we had to do this whole thing. And he said at some point, he's like, you know, you're always worried about all this planning and this risk management and stuff. And he goes, and nothing ever goes wrong. But for me, it's like, yeah, nothing goes wrong because I plan ahead.
get everything. Think about the risk
The
management.
correlation there. But to his point, like he's not like that. And life just works out for him. He would figure it out when he got to the airport. He might
Hmm.
lose a monitor. He might have to ship it there. Who knows what would happen, right? Like he trusts that he's going to figure it out when he gets there because things have been safe for him. Where for me, it's like, you can't wait till then. Like, you have to prep and make sure that nothing
You
goes
might have to
bad.
have three different plans,
Oh, yeah, at
a
least.
backup plan and a backup plan, right?
I had to take a monitor somewhere, I probably would have shipped it there
Right,
instead of like taking it with me or whatever the thing is, right? Just to minimize the risk to the damage or
right.
whatever. And for him, it's just like he just trusts that when he gets there, he's going to know what to do and he's going to figure it out. And I find it like it's really beautiful. So, and sometimes I do embrace it. Like when we
Mhm.
go on camping trips or even our vacations now, they're minimally planned. Like we know the general area that we're going to go to. And that's basically it. Maybe a couple of things that we want to do, but we let everything else go. And that has been such a beautiful treat for me to lean into and go, I can trust myself. I can trust that when I show up, that we're going to do the right thing, that the thing that we're supposed to do is going to show up and go, hey, I'm here, come do this thing. Um, and
It's going to be
and it,
okay. It's going
yeah,
to be
like because
okay.
vacations can be over planned, right? Like I
Hmm.
went through that when I was young and I went with a friend and it was like so much. And I was like, I don't want to do all that. Like I want to figure out what's right in the moment. And so in that way, I've been able to lean into it. Um, and get away from the people pleasing and the perfection and all of those things. He's been a real champ with witnessing it all too and trying to understand because for him he doesn't understand how our brains work and why we
No,
have to overthink every dang thing.
no, no, no. It's true because, and my husband's been a real sweetheart about it too. And he's very patient and kind. And he is really, he's like one of my first safe places with people,
Mhm,
outside of therapy. Really, he's my first truly safe place where I can show that side that would carry, inside because of the shame.
mhm,
But he also knows, like I had a full on trigger right in front of him one time and I just walked the whole thing out in front of him and he was so sweet about it and just listened, didn't try to
mhm,
fix it. He just
mhm,
listened and let me process it, which I did, and I came to the right conclusion and moved on.
mhm.
But it was refreshing to have him there and I could be that, I don't want to say crazy because that's not what it was, but just triggered person. I was a triggered
Mhm.
person at that moment and it was okay. Usually when I would be triggered before and not realize it and do the damage and not realize what it was, just it was a big mess to clean up.
Yep. I hear you, sister, on that one. Like, so much because I also grew up with that, like that mean girl where if you were the meanest one or if you could say that thing, that would just shut down the conversation, right? But those things really didn't help me in my 30s or 40s or, beyond because it's just like, is that really how I want to show up? No,
Yeah.
that's a defensive mask that I'm using, right? Of being mean because I don't want to be criticized. So if I build a 6 foot wall around me, then nobody can hurt me. Right. And I think that that's what a lot of us trauma kids did was we build this really big wall between us and other people. And so if they got too close and we got too vulnerable or we were scared that something was going to happen, it was like, let me show you who I am and why you want to be away from me. And yeah, and then it's a big mess to clean up because what we learned by our 30s is like, wow, why is nobody hanging around me? Maybe it's a giant wall I have put up and I won't
Hmm.
let anybody in. And so they get tired of knocking.
And I feel so alone and I don't like
Mhm.
the way I feel. And
Yeah.
why is this? Yeah, I remember. I remember that. Like, I guess my very first transition in my young adult life of recognizing that and literally sitting there thinking like, what is going on? Why, and it was probably the very beginning of me realizing it's within me to make the changes. I never called
Mhm.
myself broken. I
Mhm.
never called myself broken, but I did recognize that there was something within me
Mhm.
that needed to change in order for me to have the life that I wanted. I just knew that. I didn't know what that meant, but I just
Mhm.
knew that it was something within me that needed to change. It took me a while to figure it out. I'm still working on it, but I've come
Well,
a
I
long
think
way.
we put a lot of that stuff in our shame, right? Like that mean girl, I can put it in my shame. And once I put it in my shame, I don't really want to look at it because it's ugly and it's scary. And what I learned in my 30s was, okay, you have this bitch energy, but that's not necessarily bad,
Right.
right? There are times where we need that energy.
Hmm.
Now, I was sprinkling it around a little too much. Like I didn't need to be using as much of that ingredient as I was, but there is something really beautiful about the fact that I can stand up for myself and be really strong. And, if somebody's kidnapping my child, I want to bring that energy out. I want that energy to be there, right? So it's not a bad energy. It's just a too much. I was using it too much. My warrior would come out and cut everybody at the knees before they could even do anything,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like
Get them before they
before they
get
could
you.
even yeah. And so that was the too much energy, but I don't ever want to get rid of that energy altogether. There's times where I do need to stand up for myself and I do need to use a little bit of aggression if it's being used at me. And I can pull that out when I really need it, but because I've examined her, I don't have to pull it out all the time. And
Right.
that feels so much better because I only want to bring it out when there's going to be a mess regardless. Like
Hmm.
I don't want to bring it out and create the mess, right? So I can keep saying, "Oh, yep, there you are again. That's who you are. That's how you show up." And no, it's not. I can, but I choose not to most of the time.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, out of balance, that can be a
Hmm.
problem. And I was so out of balance for so long.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I get it, but I think that it's the people who have the extremes that do all the work then, because at some point we get tired of being for me the big growth part for me was after my divorce from my first husband. I was angry for like 5 years. I
Mm.
was so angry and I left him, but I was still so angry. And um and I just got tired of being angry all the time. At some point I was like, I am exhausted of anger. Like, what is going on for me? How can I shift this? Because I don't want this to be the way the rest of my life goes. Being so angry every day, just
Hmm.
so angry. And I just couldn't handle it anymore. And so I had to find a new way to manage all of these things in a better way. And then I have this really great second husband who, like, thankfully, he's patient and he can sit and hold the space without trying to fix it because that never works for me either.
Mm-mm.
Um, and yeah, and he's taught me a lot. I've done a whole ton of work. I mean, as you know, therapy for years and years, and coaches and mentors and women's circles, all kinds of things, which
Yeah,
is
lots of different things that help you. Yeah, there isn't one way of healing. We can get stuff from many different
yeah, so
ways.
many different things I've gotten from, I mean, just sitting in circle with women and having other women hear me and witness me and see me in my pain and stuff. That alone, I believe, can take a huge load of the weight off of whatever you're going through.
It's hugely
Um,
vulnerable.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
not a comfortable place for us at all.
no, but it can be if we create a safe space for it. So
Yes.
there's lots of women's circles out there that create safe containers for them. And I would highly suggest Woman Within is a nonprofit organization that does it. I have circles in my groups that's how because they don't always need somebody to fix them. Sometimes they just need to be heard. And by being able to speak out loud, we start processing a little
Hmm.
better than I know at first when I started trying to process within myself, it was like I just kept going down that suffering spiral over and over and over again and spinning all the thoughts because I didn't have tools to be like, oh, when this happens, this is what I'm going to do. Or here's some questions I could ask myself, or go take a nappy,
Hmm.
like
Do
whatever it
something.
is. Yeah, whatever it is, make a different choice rather than just continuing to go down this shame spiral and try something different, right? And so yeah, there's so many ways to heal. And the only thing is that we have to stay committed to it, I believe. Is just like committed at looking at the parts of us that maybe we don't think is so beautiful right now. But I promise you, you can find gifts out of all of them. I'm not one for silver linings. I'm just one for we each have our own unique journey, trauma, beauty, all of it. And that means that we each have our own separate mix of gifts that we have. And I think that if we can embrace those, it's a little easier than constantly embracing what's wrong about me.
I mean, it's true. An exercise you can try is, if you can sit and think of something that you do well, and you kind of meditate on that a little bit, or you meditate on the bad things that you've done, you can feel the difference.
Mm.
And we're
Mhm.
so easy. It's like the default is to be so hard on ourselves.
Mhm.
And one word of advice, and I bring it up a couple times in my podcast, and somebody said it to me one time, and it's really stuck with me because I tend to be critical or judgmental, and I've had to work on that, is replacing judgment with curiosity.
Yes.
So rather
I
than
talk about
being
that all the time.
hard on yourself, like you say, ask the questions, be
Mhm.
curious. Why? Don't judge yourself. Okay, yeah, you made a mistake. Let's figure this out.
Mhm.
Why? So that you don't do it again, or you
Mhm.
catch yourself a little sooner. It's all a
Mhm.
learning. This is a
Mhm.
journey. And so being curious rather than judgmental.
Mhm.
And that I learned that right around the time when I heard the voice that was so hard on me. And it was actually my mother's voice. It was interesting.
Mhm.
Um, but I put that together, and I'm still working on that, in implementing that, right?
Sure. Sure.
But boy,
Yeah.
has that been liberating, and it
Mm.
breaks that loop. It breaks that loop that you're
Yeah,
talking about.
because curiosity is about staying open and like gathering more information, where judgment is like, I already have a decision on this and this is all it can be.
Right.
And so it really closes us off, and it just throws this thing into like a whole bucket of shame rather than like, and not all those things are going to fit in that bucket, but we throw them in. But curiosity opens us up. And one of the greatest questions that I still use with my clients today, I actually learned from a corporate sales trainer back in like my corporate days, was what if the opposite is true?
Yeah.
Because we make all these assumptions that if I show up this way, these people aren't going to like me. Well, what if they like you more because you're showing up vulnerable? What if they like you more because you're showing up real and it reminds them of themselves or someone that they love? Like we don't really know. So so when we are having a hard time having curiosity, what if the opposite were true? And just imagine, just make it up. Like instead of what if my book fails? What if it actually helps a million women like get where they need to be in life and gives them some kind of forward motion? Like, what if that happens? Because those things, those extremes are just as likely, right? They're just as
Mhm.
likely. And most likely it's going to be somewhere in the middle.
Right,
Like,
right, right.
but in order for us to open up our judgment, what if the opposite is true? And then the first question that most of my clients have to ask themselves, because there's a reason why we have all these judgments. We believe that we're right. Somebody told us that we're right, and this is the truth of the world, right? Um, is this unsafe or uncomfortable? Because most people, we confuse discomfort with safety issues, and they're not. Our brain just doesn't have enough safety issues to worry about anymore because we're not chased by bears, and we're not, there's survival is a little easier today than it was 200 years ago
Sure.
or 500 years ago. And so our brain confuses this. Is this uncomfortable or is this unsafe? Because discomfort is where the growth is. Like, so we want to be uncomfortable. Sometimes we're not meant to be comfortable all the time. That we would be a blob on the couch, right? I would be a blob on the couch with my vodka and the Gilmore Girls, and that's it. That's all I would do. But
Yeah.
yeah, starting to ask ourselves, what is the true risk of this, right? Because we are risk managers, and so we want to plan for everything, but most of the things that we're planning for are for our comfort. They're not necessarily for safety, right?
True.
Like, they're now today, now that we're adults. I mean, when we were children, it was about safety. But today, that now that we control our lives a bit and our home lives aren't the same way, like, really, is this just uncomfortable or is this unsafe? And usually, like, I'm afraid I'm going to fail. I'll have to start over. I'll be humiliated. These are just uncomfortable things. These are not
Hmm.
safe issues. And so, if we can ask ourselves that, we might be able to expand our view a little bit more too.
And there's a quick story I will share on that is, and this is a coach that I had a few years ago, and it was really one of the only good things that he said to me, but it really stopped me in my tracks and has really taken my life in a different direction. Is he said, Lisa, you need to see things in color. You're looking at everything black and white. And
Mhm,
again, that's the whole risk manager thing, right?
mhm,
Don't think outside the box, let's find that safest place. And when he said that to me, it literally took my breath away. And I knew he was right. I just didn't know what that meant.
mhm,
And I've been exploring that in every part of my life. And that has really helped with my healing because it
mhm,
kept me from going, okay, it's only this way. It's expanded it so that I'm like, well, let me try this and let me try
mhm.
that. And, some have worked, some have not.
What's the
But
worst that can happen?
I
Mhm,
tried and it didn't work.
mhm,
For me, even if I didn't feel like it was a big thing, I always learned something. I always had some kind of golden nugget that I got out of it. Right. But the whole thing of opening up your mind and not just thinking black and white, but bringing in color.
mhm. That there's many ways of doing something. That was very part of my, version of Catholic upbringing was this is right. All of that is wrong. Anything that's not this one thing is wrong.
Hmm.
And like again, my husband grew up in a completely different type of family and it was like, we can try anything unless it's not unsafe. Right? Like that's the big thing. Like you're not allowed to hurt each other. You're not allowed to, but you can try it whatever way you want. And his mom would be curious with him, like, "Whew, I wonder how it'll work out when you do it that way, or you don't plan or whatever." Like, and so there's so many more options. And I was always common sense and efficiency and
Hmm.
productivity, right? And those three things, if we look at that triangular, there probably is only a couple of right answers. But what if we introduce fun instead of efficiency?
Oof.
What if,
Yes.
what if we actually enjoyed what we were doing? Would we be more productive or, would we not? Because there's a story of an art class who was split into two and they were each given clay and one group had to make the most statues or clay things, right? The most art. They were going over quantity. The other group was going for quality. They just had to focus on making the most beautiful pieces. Well, what happened was the group who just kept doing it over and over and over again, their pieces started being more beautiful than the ones that were focused on the quality because it's the practice of trying the different things, of, going through it over and over and over again, and then trying little different things rather than sitting there and just trying to create a masterpiece. That's so much pressure. So, for those of you that aren't creative, if you go to like, I'm going to write the best book in the whole world, good luck. Because that's
Perfectionism.
going
You
to
are
be hard,
describing,
right?
you're
Going
trying.
straight to perfectionism
Yeah.
rather it's actually a creative art. And like the more creative something takes, we need iterations of it. So we can
Yeah.
try it many, many different ways. And that's going to get us further than trying that one way that puts so much pressure on us. So we don't have to like doing the dishes. My husband does them in a way that I'm just like, why? That takes so long. What are you doing? He's got to organize them. He's got to get the water. He's got to, and this doesn't matter if there's like 10 dishes or 100. Like it's the same process and it takes forever. And I used to criticize him over this because, like, for me, I hate doing dishes. So seeing him like have to be at the sink that long was just like, oh my God, that must be mind wrangling, right? But he didn't care because he did them in a way that was easy for him and he was comfortable with it. It didn't bother him that he was doing it. He wasn't counting the minutes or the seconds to be done with it. He was just there being with the dishes, like, and
So simple.
Right. Like, so why do I care? Because one, I'm not doing the dishes. Why do I care? And two, like, he just approaches things in a different way that isn't necessarily about productivity, efficiency, and common sense.
Hmm.
Like he does them in the way that feels good to him, which is like, wow, people can just do that. They can just do things the way that they feel good doing them. Like that was not allowed in my house. That was not allowed. It was like, you could get more done if you did it this way. Okay.
Right. Don't think for yourself.
Right, right. Just do it efficiency and productivity. But what if those aren't my values? What if that's not what's most important to me?
Hmm.
Right. But I wasn't taught that there was another way. Right. So going back to that, this is the right way. Everything else is wrong. That black and white thinking that, if it's not right, it's wrong.
And that story you just told about your husband, I mean, that's a beautiful way of showing that, look, I don't have to control that. Oof.
Yeah, like freaking take 3 hours. I don't care. I'm not doing
I'm
them.
going
What
to
do I
get to go do something that, is good for me.
I can watch TV even. Like, I mean, what do I care that he's doing
Right.
them now? And it doesn't bother him. So why should it bother me? It's getting done. And I'm
Right.
not
It's
doing
getting done and you're not doing it. The best
it.
thing.
Right. Right. But something I had to let go of because of that critical childhood that I
Hmm.
had, which was like everything had to be perfect. And, the perfection of like doing everything exactly right and efficiently.
Hmm. And if it's not done this way, then it's wrong.
Yeah, because
Period.
it would not make sense to do it any other way. And if it doesn't make sense, it must be wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Christina, this has been really good. Thank
Right.
you.
Like what a
Thank you.
conversation.
I know,
I
right?
feel
So let me
feel
ask
like
you
I've been to
this.
therapy.
I know. I literally, I walk out of these, I learn a lot every time. I'm really energized when I get out of these too. When I get done with the
Mm,
podcast, like I'm literally buzzing around the house doing stuff and, go outside and move around because
mm,
it's really energizing. But
mhm.
let me ask you one question. What
Mm.
would you like to leave with your listeners? What's one thing you'd like to leave for your
Ah,
listeners or for our
I think
listeners?
what I like to leave people with is just to remember to be gentle with your humanness. It's a human experience. It's not perfect. It's really messy. And so, if we can just learn to be really gentle with ourselves through it and be kind to ourselves, that we're going to get a lot further than meanness or shame or any of that stuff. Just
Mhm.
being recognizing that it's a very delicate way of living in this human body and this human experience. And so, just be gentle, love on yourself, forgive yourself, all of those things.
I love that. It's so true. And it's a process,
Mm-hmm.
start with one small thing that makes you
Mm-hmm.
feel good for yourself. Start there.
Mm-hmm.
So, how could people get in touch with you if they want to reach out to you for some coaching? And I understand you have a book too.
Yes, so I have the Inviting Shift book, which you can find on Amazon if you look up Inviting Shift and my name. The mentorship you can find on my website. It's christina-smith.com. And I also have an intentional aligned program. So if you just want the clarity and you don't want the coaching, we can get you clear in a weekend and aligned with what you want, even if you don't know what that is now. And I do have coaching, and it's all on that website. So I hope that you'll go check it out. I'm sure I have some free resources there as well. Just check the resources button. And yeah, I'd love to chat with you. So feel free to reach out through my website.
And we'll have all your links and everything for
Beautiful.
everybody. And as well as on my website, which I just created. So any of the books and
Beautiful.
stuff, people can go to my website and they just have to click on it and they can order it or whatever.
Beautiful.
So, well, thank you so much. This has been really good. Great
Thank you.
conversation. Learn
Yeah.
something every time.
I do too. I do too. Thank you for having me. I appreciate
Mhm.
it.